The moment his hand closed around my wrist, the entire ballroom stopped breathing. I had been carrying a tray of empty glasses toward the kitchen, trying to disappear into the marble walls the way I had trained myself to do every night I worked one of these parties. Waiters were supposed to be invisible. We were supposed to move through rooms full of powerful people like ghosts, seen only when something needed refilling. I had gotten good at it. 6 months of catering events for Damien Vale had taught me exactly how to vanish in plain sight. But that night, I did not vanish fast enough. I felt his fingers first, warm and firm around my wrist, stopping me mid-step. The glasses on my tray rattled. I turned, already forming an apology, already bracing for whatever mistake I must have made, and found myself looking up into the face that made grown men lower their eyes when they spoke to him. Damien Vale did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Every person in that ballroom, from the senators sipping champagne near the fireplace to the men in dark suits stationed at every exit, understood, without being told, that his word was the only law that mattered in this house. And now his hand was on me. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but he was already pulling the tray from my hands and setting it on a passing waiter's cart without looking away from me. Then, before I understood what was happening, he drew me down onto his lap as he settled into the velvet armchair positioned at the head of the room, the one guests had been careful not to even glance at directly all evening. The music did not stop. The string quartet kept playing somewhere near the tall windows. But every conversation around us died within seconds, spreading outward like ripples in still water. Glasses paused halfway to lips. A woman in a green gown stopped laughing mid-breath. I felt dozens of eyes land on me at once, and I had never in my life wanted so badly to become smoke and drift out through the cracks in the walls. My heart was slamming so hard I was certain he could feel it through my uniform. I sat rigid on his lap, my hands frozen in my own lap, staring straight ahead at nothing, because I did not dare look at any of the guests watching us. I did not dare look at him either. "Relax," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only I could hear it over the music. "You look like you are about to run." "I don't understand what is happening," I whispered back, keeping my lips barely moving, the way I imagined people did in films when they did not want to be caught talking. "Neither does anyone else in this room," he said. "That is rather the point." I finally allowed myself a glance at him, and immediately regretted it, because his eyes were already on me, steady and unreadable, the kind of eyes that had likely watched far worse things than a frightened waitress trembling on his knee. He was not smiling, not exactly, but there was something in the set of his jaw that suggested he was enjoying himself, or at least enjoying the reaction he had caused. "Everyone is staring," I said. "Yes. Why does that not seem to bother you?" "Because it is meant to happen," he said simply, and something about the certainty in his voice frightened me more than anything else that had happened so far that night. I had worked enough of these events to know the unwritten rules. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact with the men who stood near the doors with their jackets cut, a little too loose to hide what was underneath them. Do not, under any circumstances, draw the attention of the man whose name was on the invitation. I had followed every rule for 6 months. I had been good at my job precisely because no one ever remembered my face after I left. And now, I was sitting on his lap in front of every guest, every rival, every person who mattered in this city. And I had absolutely no idea why. A tall man in a charcoal suit approached from across the room, moving with the careful, measured steps of someone who had learned long ago never to walk quickly around Damien Vale. He stopped a respectful distance away and inclined his head. "Sir," the man said, his eyes flicking to me for only a fraction of a second before returning to his boss. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, Peter," Damien said, his hand resting lightly against my waist, not gripping, just present, as if to remind me it was there. "Tell the band to play something with a little more energy. This party has become far too quiet." Peter's gaze slid to me again, longer this time, filled with a question he clearly knew better than to ask aloud. Then he nodded and retreated, and moments later the music shifted into something livelier, and the room, taking its cue, began to move again. Conversations resumed in low, careful murmurs. But I could feel it, the way people were still watching us out of the corners of their eyes. the way the air itself seemed thick with unspoken questions. I tried to shift off his lap, gently, testing whether he would let me go now that his point, whatever it was, had apparently been made. His arm tightened, not painfully, but enough to make it clear I was not going anywhere yet. "Stay," he said. "People are talking about us," I said. "People are always talking. Tonight, they simply have something new to talk about." "I have work to do," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to sound calm. "I have glasses to collect, tables to clear. I am going to lose my job standing here." For the first time since he had pulled me down, something flickered across his face that almost resembled amusement. "You will not lose your job," he said. "I own the company that hired you tonight." That silenced me more effectively than anything else he could have said. I stared at him, trying to process the sentence, trying to understand how a man like him, a man whose name people whispered with equal parts fear and respect, would bother owning a small catering staffing agency that sent underpaid workers like me to serve drinks at parties. "Why would you do that?" I finally managed. "Business interests take many forms," he said, which was not an answer at all, but the way he said it told me I would get nothing more specific tonight. Across the room, I noticed a woman watching us with an expression I could not quite name, somewhere between curiosity and something sharper, something colder. She wore a deep red dress and stood near one of his men, and when our eyes briefly met, she looked away first, but not before I caught the flash of calculation behind her gaze. I did not know who she was. I only knew that whatever had just happened between Damien Vale and me had registered with her as something important, something worth watching closely. "People will think things," I said quietly, "about why I am here, about what this means." "Let them," he said. "That is easy for you to say. You will still be Damien Vale tomorrow. I will still be Claire, the girl who apparently sat in his lap at a party and does not know why." He studied me for a long moment, and for the first time, the calculated stillness in his expression softened, just slightly, just enough that I could see the shape of a man underneath the reputation, someone who was watching me the way a person watches a puzzle they had not expected to find interesting. "You know my name," he said. "Everyone knows your name. But you said it like it means something different to you than it does to them." I did not have an answer for that, because I was not entirely sure it was true, and even if it was, I was not ready to examine why. The song ended, and in the pause before the next one began, I heard him lean slightly closer, his voice dropping low enough that it felt like it belonged only to me. "You served drinks at my card table 3 weeks ago," he said. "Do you remember that?" My stomach tightened. I did remember. It had been a smaller gathering, private, in a back room I was not supposed to enter without being called. I had been asked to bring refreshments, and had nearly walked straight into an argument that ended the moment I appeared in the doorway, all the men at the table falling silent and staring at me until I retreated, red-faced and confused, back into the hallway. "I remember," I said carefully. "I did not see anything. I did not hear anything either." "That is not entirely true," he said, and the softness was gone from his voice now, replaced by something more precise, more deliberate. "You heard a name, and that name has caused me a great deal of trouble ever since." The room around us seemed to grow smaller, the music fading into the background of my own racing thoughts. I tried to remember exactly what had been said in those few seconds before I fled the doorway, but panic was already scrambling the memory, turning it into fragments too broken to piece together. "I don't understand," I said. "What does that have to do with tonight, with this?" Damien Vale looked at me for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough that I had to lean in slightly to hear him over the music, an action that only drew us closer together in front of a room full of watching eyes. "Because tonight, everyone in this room needed to see that you belong to me," he said, "whether you understand why yet or not." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, spreading outward through me in slow, cold waves. Before I could respond, before I could even begin to process what he meant by belong, the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and a hush fell over the room that had nothing to do with us anymore. A new group of guests had arrived, and judging by the way every one of Damien's men straightened at their posts, and the way his own body went rigid beneath me, Whoever had just walked in was not someone he had been expecting, and definitely not someone he wanted anywhere near me. The doors swung open wide enough to let in the cold night air, and with it came a man I had never seen before, flanked by two others who moved with the same unhurried confidence Damien's own guards carried. The newcomer wore a pale gray suit, out of place among the darker colors favored by everyone else in the room, and he smiled as he walked, the kind of smile that did not reach his eyes. "Victor," Damien said under his breath, so quietly I almost missed it. I felt his arm tighten around my waist again, and this time it was not gentle. It was the grip of a man preparing for something. "Who is he?" I whispered. "Someone who was not invited," Damien said, "which means he came here to send a message." Victor crossed the ballroom floor as if he owned it, nodding to a few guests along the way, shaking hands with practiced charm, while his two companions stayed a step behind, scanning the room the way I imagined soldiers scanned a battlefield. When he reached the small cleared space in front of Damien's chair, he stopped and spread his hands wide in a gesture of mock apology. "Forgive the interruption," Victor said, his voice carrying easily across the now silent room. "I heard there was a party, and I thought, what kind of neighbor would I be if I did not stop by to offer my congratulations?" "Congratulations for what?" Damien asked, his tone flat, giving nothing away. Victor's gaze slid to me, slow and deliberate, taking in the sight of me still perched on Damien's lap, my hands clenched tightly in front of me. "For your new acquisition," Victor said, gesturing toward me with two fingers. "Word travels fast in this city. I hear she was seen leaving your card room a few weeks ago. I hear she heard something interesting that night." My blood went cold. Whatever had happened in that back room, whatever name I had overheard, it was clearly not a secret contained to Damien's household. Victor knew. And if Victor knew, it meant other people knew too. People who might not be as careful with me as Damien apparently intended to be. "You heard wrong," Damien said, his voice never rising, never wavering, though I could feel the tension coiled through his body beneath me like a spring pulled tight. "She serves drinks at my parties, nothing more." "Is that so?" Victor's smile widened, and he took a slow step closer, close enough that one of Damien's men shifted forward instinctively before catching himself and stepping back into position. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like you went to a great deal of trouble tonight to make sure every person in this room understood exactly how much she matters to you. That is not the behavior of a man protecting someone who means nothing. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the marble floor to open beneath me and swallow me whole, so I would never have to be the center of whatever dangerous game was being played out in front of 24 of the city's most powerful and most dangerous people. But there was nowhere to go, and Damien's arm around my waist made it clear that leaving was not an option he was offering. "You came here uninvited to discuss household staff," Damien said. "I find that beneath even you, Victor." "I came here," Victor said, his charm slipping just slightly, revealing something colder underneath. "Because a man in your card room said a name he should never have said, in front of a girl who should never have heard it, and now that name is a problem for both of us. I want to know what you intend to do about that problem." The silence that followed felt endless. I did not understand most of what was being discussed, but I understood enough to know that I had become something dangerous, simply by being in the wrong doorway, at the wrong moment, 3 weeks earlier. Whatever name had slipped out that night, it connected these two men in a way that made the air between them feel charged, like the moment before lightning struck. "The problem," Damien said slowly, "will be handled. My way, not yours." "And the girl? Is not your concern?" Victor studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to hold his gaze, refusing to look away first, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to shrink smaller, to become invisible again, the way I had trained myself to be for 6 months. Something in my refusal to look away seemed to interest him, because his smile shifted into something almost thoughtful. "She has spirit," Victor said. "That is either very useful or very dangerous, depending on how this plays out." He turned back to Damien. "You have 1 week to resolve this quietly. After that, I stop being patient, and I stop caring who gets caught in the middle." He gave a small, mocking bow, then turned and walked back through the parted crowd toward the doors, his two companions falling in step behind him without a word. The moment the doors closed behind them, the room seemed to exhale as one, conversations picking back up in hurried, nervous bursts, though I could tell from the way people kept glancing in our direction that the party had fundamentally changed in the last 10 minutes. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the closed doors, and I could feel the barely restrained anger radiating off him like heat from a stove. "What did I hear?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That night, what name did I hear that made everyone look at me like that?" He turned his attention back to me, and for a moment, I thought he might actually answer, might finally give me some piece of the truth I had been circling blindly for 3 weeks. Instead, he stood, lifting me easily off his lap and setting me on my feet beside the chair, though his hand stayed firm around my wrist. "Not here," he said. "Come with me. I have work to finish," I said weakly, though we both knew it was no longer a real objection. "Peter will handle the rest of the evening," he said, already leading me toward a side door tucked discreetly behind a curtain near the fireplace. "You and I need to talk somewhere that is not surrounded by 200 people who would very much like to know what you know." I let him lead me, partly because I did not see any reasonable way to refuse, and partly because I realized, somewhere in the last 10 minutes, that my curiosity had begun to outweigh my fear. I wanted to know what I had walked into that night. I wanted to know why a single overheard word had turned me into something valuable enough for a man like Damien Vale to claim in front of an entire ballroom, and dangerous enough for a man like Victor to threaten in the same breath. The side door led into a quiet hallway, lined with dark wood paneling, and old paintings I did not have time to properly look at. The noise of the party faded quickly behind us, replaced by the hollow echo of our footsteps on polished floor. Damien did not speak until we reached a set of double doors at the end of the hallway, which he pushed open to reveal a private study, bookshelves rising to the ceiling, a large desk positioned near tall windows overlooking the dark gardens outside. He released my wrist and gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. I did, mostly because my legs felt unsteady, and I was not sure how much longer they would hold me upright. "3 weeks ago," he began, moving to stand near the window rather than sitting across from me, "I was meeting with a man named Henry Pruitt about a shipment that had gone missing from one of my warehouses. During that meeting, Henry mentioned a name that should not exist in any conversation involving my business, because the person attached to that name has been dead for 11 years. "Dead," I repeated, my throat suddenly dry. "Officially, yes. Which means if that name is circulating again, somewhere in a conversation between men I am supposed to trust, it means someone is either lying about a death that never happened, or someone is using that name to send me a message I do not yet understand." He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable in the low lamplight. "And you heard it, standing in that doorway with a tray of drinks in your hands." "I don't even remember what I heard," I said honestly. "I panicked. I left as fast as I could." "I believe you," he said, which surprised me. "But belief does not matter to men like Victor. What matters to him is that you were there, that you heard something, and that gives him leverage over both of us, whether you actually remember the name or not." I sat with that for a moment, trying to absorb the size of the danger I had apparently wandered into without ever understanding it. "So tonight," I said slowly, "when you pulled me onto your lap in front of everyone, that was not because you wanted to." Something flickered across his face, quick enough that I almost missed it. "It was strategic," he said, though his voice carried a note I could not quite place. "If Victor believes you matter to me personally, he will hesitate before doing anything reckless to you. Men like him do not attack what belongs to someone powerful without calculating the cost first. So I am a shield," I said, and I heard the bitterness creep into my own voice before I could stop it. "You are protected," he corrected. "There is a difference." "Is there?" I asked. "Because from where I am sitting, it feels very much the same." He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made me want to look away, and refuse to look away at the same time. "If I had wanted you only as a shield," he said finally, "I would have had one of my men escort you home tonight, and never thought of you again. Instead, I am standing in my own study, explaining things to you that I have not explained to anyone outside my closest circle in over a decade." I did not have a response for that. The anger in me wavered, uncertain now whether it was justified or whether I was simply frightened and looking for somewhere safe to place that fear. "What happens now?" I asked instead. "Victor gave you a week." "Now," Damien said, moving finally to sit in the chair across from me, close enough that our knees nearly touched. "You stay somewhere. I can protect you until this is resolved. And you tell me exactly what you remember from that night, even the smallest detail, because right now, that detail might be the only thing standing between a quiet resolution and a war neither of us wants." Outside the window, thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, and I realized with a sinking feeling that whatever fragile, ordinary life I had been living before tonight was already gone, replaced by something far more dangerous and far more complicated than I had ever imagined a night of serving drinks at a party could become. "All right," I said quietly. "I will tell you what I remember, but I need you to promise me something first." "What is that?" "That whatever this is, whatever I just became part of tonight, you will not let it get me killed." Damien looked at me for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and certain in a way that sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. "I do not make promises lightly," he said, "but I am making that one." I did not sleep that night. Not in the guest room Damien's staff prepared for me on the second floor of a house I had only ever seen through service entrances and kitchen doorways. The bed was soft, softer than anything I had ever slept on, and the sheets smelled faintly of lavender, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Victor's cold smile and heard Damien's voice telling me a dead man's name had somehow found its way back into the world through a doorway I should never have walked past. By morning, I had pieced together only fragments of memory from that night 3 weeks earlier. A man's voice, rough and low, saying something about a shipment. Another voice, sharper, cutting him off. And then, just before I backed out of the doorway with my tray shaking in my hands, a single word that had meant nothing to me at the time. A name, Calloway. I did not know if it was the right name. I did not know if my exhausted, panicked brain had even remembered it correctly. But it was the only piece I had, and when Damien came to find me in the small breakfast room overlooking the garden, I told him immediately, before my nerve could fail me. He went very still. "Say it again," he said. "Calloway," I repeated. "I think that is what I heard." "I am not certain. I was frightened, and I left as quickly as I could." He did not answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window and stood there for a long moment, his back to me, his shoulders set in a way that told me the name meant something significant, something he had not expected to hear again. "Edmund Calloway," he said finally, "ran the Western Docks before I did. He controlled a third of everything that moved through this city for almost 15 years. 11 years ago, he was found dead in his own car, and the official story was a heart attack. Nobody who actually knew him believed that for a second, but nobody pushed the question either, because pushing questions about Edmund Calloway's death was a good way to end up having a heart attack yourself." "And you think he is alive?" I said slowly. "I think someone wants me to believe he is," Damien said, turning back to face me. "Or someone is using his name as a weapon, which might be worse, because it means someone out there knows exactly how much chaos that name can cause, simply by existing in a sentence again." The morning passed in a blur of tense phone calls I was not permitted to hear, and hushed conversations conducted in rooms I was gently, but firmly kept out of. Peter checked on me twice, bringing food I barely touched, and offering reassurances that did little to calm the knot sitting permanently in my stomach. By the time evening arrived, I had learned only one new thing, that Damien intended to keep me in the house until Victor's deadline passed, whether I agreed to that arrangement or not. I found him alone that evening, in the same study where we had talked the night before, papers spread across his desk, his sleeves rolled up, his usual composed exterior showing the first real cracks I had seen since meeting him. "You cannot keep me here like a prisoner," I said, standing in the doorway. "I have a life, an apartment, people who will notice if I disappear. Your landlord has already been informed you are staying with a sick relative," he said, without looking up from his papers. "Your co-workers believe you took an unexpected leave. Everything has been handled." "Handled," I repeated, anger flaring hot and sudden in my chest. "You mean lied to, on my behalf, without asking me?" He finally looked up, and something in my expression must have surprised him, because the sharp edge in his own gaze softened slightly. "I did not have time to ask," he said. "Victor's people were already watching your apartment building by this morning. If you had gone home tonight, I cannot promise you would have made it back out again." That silenced my anger, replacing it with a cold, creeping fear that settled into my bones and refused to leave. "They were watching my building," I said quietly. "Because of me. Because of a name I barely remember hearing. Because of a name that could unravel a decade of careful balance in this city," he said. "You are not merely a witness anymore, Claire. You are a variable neither side can predict, and that makes you valuable to people who do not care whether you survive the next week or not." I sank into the chair across from his desk, the fight draining out of me as quickly as it had risen. "I never asked for any of this," I said. "I just wanted to work my shift and go home." "I know." His voice was quieter now, and when he came around the desk to sit beside me instead of behind it, I did not object. "For whatever it is worth, I am sorry you were pulled into something that has nothing to do with you." "Is it really nothing to do with me?" I asked. "Or did I stumble into the middle of something that was always going to explode eventually, and I just happened to be standing close enough to get hurt by it?" He considered that for a long moment, and I appreciated that he did not rush to answer, that he seemed to actually think about what I had said rather than offering an easy reassurance. "The second one," he admitted finally. "Edmund Calloway's death was never fully settled business. There were people who benefited from it, people who lost everything because of it, and at least one person who has apparently decided 11 years was long enough to wait before stirring it back to life." "Who benefited?" I asked. "From his death, I mean." Something guarded crossed his face, quick and deliberate, and I understood immediately that whatever answer existed to that question, he was not ready to give it to me yet, if he ever would be. "That is a conversation for another time," he said. "You keep saying that," I said, frustration creeping back into my voice. "Another time, not here, later. I am the one whose life is apparently in danger because of a word I overheard, and I still know almost nothing about what is actually happening." "You know more than you should," he said. "For your own safety, that needs to remain true for as long as possible." Before the silence could settle too deeply, a woman appeared in the doorway of the study, and I recognized her instantly as the guest in the red dress who had watched us so closely at the party the night before. Up close, she looked younger than I had first thought, with sharp eyes and a posture that suggested years of learning to hold herself carefully in rooms full of dangerous men. "Grace," Damien said, his tone shifting into something more formal. "I did not expect you tonight." "I heard about Victor's little visit," Grace said, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation, her gaze flicking briefly to me before returning to Damien. "News like that moves quickly among people who pay attention. I came to see for myself whether the rumors were true." "Which rumors?" Damien asked, though something in his voice suggested he already knew. "That you have taken a personal interest in a girl who overheard something she should not have," Grace said, her eyes settling on me again, more thoughtful this time than hostile. "I run the eastern shipping routes for you, in case nobody has bothered to introduce us properly, which means anything that threatens the stability of this city threatens my business as much as yours." "Claire," Damien said, gesturing toward me, "this is Grace Whitmore. She has been with my organization longer than almost anyone else in this house." Grace offered me a small nod, not unfriendly, but measuring, the way I imagined she measured everyone she met for the first time. "You look tired," she said, not unkindly. "I imagine the last 2 days have not been easy for you." "That would be an understatement," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice came out. A faint, approving smile touched Grace's mouth before she turned her attention back to Damien. "I heard Calloway's name was mentioned," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "Is that true?" "It is true," Damien said. Grace's expression darkened, the easy composure slipping just slightly to reveal something more troubled underneath. "Then this is worse than I thought," she said. "Do you remember who else was close to Calloway before he died? Because if someone is reviving that name after 11 years of silence, I do not think it is a coincidence that it happened right before the anniversary of his death." Damien went very still. and I watched something calculate rapidly behind his eyes, some connection forming that clearly had not occurred to him until Grace said it aloud. "The anniversary is in 4 days," he said quietly. 4 days, Grace repeated, which gives Victor exactly enough time to use his 1-week deadline as cover for whatever he actually intends to do. She looked between the two of us, her sharp gaze lingering on me a moment longer than necessary. "I would be very careful who you trust in the coming days, Claire. Not everyone in this house is as loyal as they appear, and not everyone outside it is as dangerous as they seem. The line between the two is thinner than most people realize." With that, she inclined her head toward Damien and left the study as quickly as she had entered it, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before, weighted now with the added knowledge of a ticking clock neither of us had known existed until a few moments ago. "What did she mean?" I asked. "About not everyone being who they appear." "Grace does not say things carelessly," Damien said, his voice low and thoughtful. "If she is warning me to be careful about trust, it is because she has noticed something I have not yet." We sat in tense silence for a while after that, the only sound the soft ticking of a clock somewhere on the far wall and the occasional murmur of voices from the hallway outside. I studied him in the low lamplight, trying to reconcile the man sitting beside me, tired and careful, and oddly gentle in this quiet room, with the man who had pulled me onto his lap in front of 200 people the night before, with such calculated confidence. "Can I ask you something else?" I said eventually. "You can ask. Last night you said it was strategic, pulling me onto your lap like that. But just now you sat down next to me instead of staying behind your desk, and nobody is watching us right now. So which version of you am I actually talking to?" The question seemed to catch him off guard, and for a moment, something unguarded flickered across his face, before he could smooth it back into careful neutrality. "Perhaps both are real," he said finally. "The version that understands strategy, and the version that finds himself, against his own better judgment, wanting to sit closer to you than strategy requires." My breath caught slightly at that, and I hated how much the honesty in his voice affected me, how it made the fear churning in my stomach twist into something else entirely, something warmer and far more dangerous than fear had any right to feel. "That is not a very reassuring answer," I said softly. "No," he agreed, "it is not." Before either of us could say anything more, a sharp knock sounded at the study door, and Peter entered without waiting for permission, his face tight with an urgency that immediately pulled both of us back into the reality of the danger surrounding us. "Sir," Peter said. "One of the men watching Victor's people just reported in. There is movement near the eastern warehouse. Looks like they are preparing something." Damien was on his feet instantly, all traces of the softer man from a moment ago replaced by something harder, sharper, entirely focused. "How many men?" "At least 6. Maybe more we have not spotted yet." "Get the car ready," Damien said. "I want eyes on that warehouse within the hour." Peter nodded and disappeared back into the hallway, and Damien turned to me, his expression already shifting back into the controlled calculation I had first seen in the ballroom. "You will stay here," he said. "Peter will leave 2 men outside this room. Do not leave the house for any reason." "What is happening at the warehouse?" I asked, rising from my chair despite the instruction to stay seated. "Something Victor wants me distracted by, most likely," he said, "or something real. I do not have time to determine which before I have people out there." "Let me come with you," I said, the words surprising even myself as they left my mouth. He turned to look at me, something between disbelief and reluctant respect crossing his features. "Absolutely not," he said. "You are the reason this entire situation exists. I am not walking you directly into the middle of it." "I am already in the middle of it," I said. "Whether I am here or there, at least if I am with you, I know what is happening, instead of sitting in a locked room, imagining every possible disaster." "No," he said again, firmer this time, and something in his tone told me the conversation was closed whether I liked it or not. He moved toward me and, before I could react, pressed a hand briefly against the side of my face, his thumb brushing lightly against my cheek, in a gesture so unexpected and so tender that it stole whatever protest I had been forming right out of my mouth. "Stay safe," he said quietly, I intend to come back and finish this conversation properly." Then he was gone, moving through the door with the same purposeful stride I imagined he used when walking into any dangerous situation, and I was left standing alone in his study, my cheeks still warm from his touch, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something I was not yet ready to name. I did not sit back down. Instead, I moved to the window and watched as headlights swept across the gravel driveway below, watched as a line of dark cars pulled away from the house and disappeared into the night, carrying Damien Vale toward whatever danger waited for him at the eastern warehouse, and leaving me behind with nothing to do but wait and wonder and hope that whatever tender thing had passed between us in this quiet room would still exist by the time he returned. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and then past 1 in the morning, and still there was no word from anyone. I paced the study until my legs ached, then moved to the hallway, where the 2 men Peter had stationed outside the door watched me with polite but immovable patience, making it clear that leaving the house was not an option no matter how many times I asked. It was nearly 2 in the morning when I heard the commotion begin, raised voices somewhere near the front entrance, hurried footsteps on the marble floors, and a tension in the air that told me, before anyone said a single word to confirm it, that whatever had happened at that warehouse had not gone the way anyone had hoped. I reached the top of the staircase just as Peter came through the front door, blood running from a cut above his eyebrow, his suit torn at the shoulder, half carrying another man whose leg dragged uselessly behind him. 2 more of Damien's men followed, faces grim, weapons still drawn as they scanned the entrance hall before finally lowering them. "Where is Damien?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended, fear cutting straight through any pretense of composure I had been trying to maintain. Peter looked up at me, his expression unreadable beneath the blood and exhaustion. "He is fine," he said quickly, seeing the panic that must have been written across my face. "He stayed behind to secure the warehouse. He sent us ahead to get Marcus to a doctor." Relief flooded through me so suddenly that my knees nearly buckled against the staircase railing. "What happened?" I asked, hurrying down the remaining steps toward them. "It was a trap," Peter said, allowing another man to help him ease Marcus onto a bench near the entrance. 6 men waiting inside, but it was never really about the warehouse. Somebody wanted us there, wanted us distracted, while something else happened somewhere we were not watching. A cold dread settled into my stomach. "Somewhere else," I repeated. "Like here." Peter's eyes met mine, and I watched the same realization dawn in his expression that had just dawned in my own. "Get her upstairs," he said sharply to the man beside him, "now." But it was already too late. The lights in the entrance hall flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging the house into sudden darkness, broken only by the pale moonlight filtering through the tall windows. Somewhere near the back of the house, glass shattered, followed immediately by shouting, footsteps pounding against marble, the unmistakable sounds of a struggle breaking out in rooms I could not see. "Move," Peter said, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward a narrow side hallway I had not noticed before, hidden behind a tapestry near the base of the staircase. "This leads to the wine cellar. There is a way out through the old delivery entrance." "What about Marcus?" I asked, glancing back at the injured man still slumped on the bench. "He cannot move fast enough." "Someone will come back for him." Peter's voice left no room for argument, and I let him half drag me through the hidden hallway, down a narrow staircase that spiraled into cool, musty darkness, the sounds of chaos above growing muffled with every step. We reached the bottom of the stairs, and Peter fumbled for a light switch, illuminating rows of wine racks stretching into the shadows. "Stay here," he said. "Do not make a sound. I need to go back up and help hold the entrance." "You cannot leave me down here alone," I said, panic clawing back up my throat. "I do not have a choice," he said, already turning back toward the stairs. "If they get past us upstairs, this is the only place they will not think to look first. It buys you time until Damien gets back." Before I could argue further, he was gone, his footsteps retreating quickly up the narrow staircase, leaving me alone in the dim cellar, with nothing but the smell of old wood and the distant, muffled sounds of a fight I could not see and did not understand. I do not know how long I stood there, pressed into the shadows between 2 wine racks, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps as I strained to hear anything that might tell me what was happening above. Minutes passed like hours. At one point, I heard footsteps on the stairs and froze, certain my hiding place had been discovered, but they retreated again without descending further, and I allowed myself to breathe again, though the fear never fully released its grip on my chest. Eventually, the sounds above grew quieter, the shouting fading into low murmurs, the pounding footsteps slowing into something more measured. I did not know if that meant the danger had passed, or simply moved somewhere else, and the uncertainty was almost worse than the noise had been. When the door at the top of the stairs finally opened again, I pressed myself further into the shadows, my heart hammering so loudly, I was certain whoever was coming down would hear it before they saw me. "Claire!" The voice was Damien's, rough with urgency, and relief hit me so hard, I nearly cried out before catching myself. I stepped out from between the wine racks, and he crossed the cellar floor in 3 long strides, pulling me into an embrace so sudden and so fierce that it knocked the breath out of me. "You are all right," he said, his voice muffled against the top of my head. "Peter told me what happened. I came back as fast as I could." "I am fine," I said, my own arms wrapping around him almost without my permission, clinging to the solid warmth of him after what felt like an eternity of darkness and fear. "What happened upstairs? Is everyone all right?" He pulled back just enough to look at me, his expression grim in the dim light. "2 of Victor's men made it inside before we caught them," he said. "Marcus was hurt worse than I would like, but he will recover. Nobody died tonight, which is more than I expected, given how close this came to going very wrong." "It was never about the warehouse," I said, echoing what Peter had told me earlier. "It was a distraction, so they could get to me here." Damien's jaw tightened, and something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "Yes," he said, "which means Victor is more desperate, or more confident, than I gave him credit for. Either way, it changes things." "How?" "It means waiting for his deadline to expire is no longer an option," he said. "If he is willing to send men into my own house before the week is even up, he has already decided this ends in conflict, regardless of what I do. I need to move first, before he has another chance to try something like this again." I studied his face in the low light, searching for some sign of the calm, calculating man from the ballroom, the one who had seemed so entirely in control of every situation he encountered. Instead, I saw something rawer, something closer to fear than I had expected to find in a man like Damien Vale, though it was fear for me rather than for himself, and that realization settled something unsteady deep inside my chest. "You came back for me," I said quietly, "instead of staying to finish whatever needed finishing at the warehouse." "Of course I came back," he said, as though the answer should have been obvious. "The moment Peter called and told me the lights had gone out here, nothing else mattered until I knew you were safe. Even though I am the reason any of this is happening in the first place." "You are not the reason," he said firmly, his hands coming up to frame my face, forcing me to hold his gaze. "You are a woman who happened to walk past the wrong doorway at the wrong moment. Victor is the reason. Whoever revived Calloway's name is the reason. None of this is your fault, and I need you to understand that, because I will not let you carry guilt for a war that was already brewing long before you ever picked up a serving tray." Something in his voice, some rare and unguarded honesty, made my throat tighten with emotion I had not expected to feel in the middle of a dark wine cellar, with danger still lingering somewhere above us. "Then what happens now?" I asked. "You said you need to move first." "Now," he said, his thumb brushing gently along my cheekbone in a gesture that felt entirely at odds with the danger surrounding us, "I take you somewhere safer than this house, somewhere Victor does not know exists, while I finish what needs finishing. And when this is over, I intend to keep the promise I made you last night. That you would not let this get me killed," I said softly. "That," he agreed, "and something else I have not fully said aloud yet, because tonight does not feel like the right moment for it." Despite everything, despite the fear and the darkness and the chaos still echoing faintly from somewhere above us, I felt a small, unexpected warmth bloom in my chest at his words, a warmth that had no business existing in a night like this one, and yet there it was, steady and undeniable. "Then let us survive first," I said, "and you can tell me the rest later." A faint, tired smile touched his mouth, The first genuine smile I had seen from him since the party began. Later, he agreed. Come. We do not have much time before Victor realizes his men failed tonight, and I would rather be somewhere unexpected when he does. The drive away from the house took place in near total silence, the car moving fast through empty streets, while Damien kept his phone pressed to his ear, listening more than speaking, his free hand resting protectively over mine on the seat between us. I watched the city blur past the window, streetlights sliding across his tense profile, and tried to steady my own breathing after everything that had happened in the last hour. We arrived at a small building tucked behind a row of shuttered shops, unremarkable from the outside, the kind of place I would have walked past 100 times without ever suspecting it belonged to a man like him. Inside, the space was simple but comfortable, a single main room with a kitchen along one wall, and a narrow staircase leading up to what I assumed were bedrooms above. Nobody knows about this place except Peter and myself, Damien said, locking the door behind us and checking the windows with quick, practiced movements. It has never been used for business. It exists purely as somewhere to disappear if disappearing ever became necessary. And tonight, it became necessary, I said, sinking into a chair at the small kitchen table, exhaustion finally catching up with the adrenaline that had carried me through the last several hours. Tonight it became necessary, he agreed, moving to the small refrigerator and pulling out 2 bottles of water, setting one in front of me before sitting across the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching comfortably between us, in a way that felt strange given everything that had just happened. His phone buzzed against the table, and he glanced at the screen before answering, his expression sharpening as he listened. "Say that again," he said, and something in his tone made my stomach tighten with fresh worry. He listened a while longer, his jaw tightening with each passing second, before finally speaking again. "Keep watching him. Do not engage unless he moves first." He ended the call and set the phone down slowly. "What is it?" I asked. "Grace had someone watching Victor's compound tonight, in case tonight's attack was a distraction from something bigger," he said. "She just confirmed a car left his property an hour ago, heading toward the old shipping district, toward the exact warehouse where Edmund Calloway used to keep his private records before he died." A chill ran through me. "You think Victor is looking for something Calloway left behind?" "I think," Damien said slowly, "that whoever revived that name is not simply trying to frighten me. They are trying to find something specific, something that has been hidden for 11 years, and they believe it still exists somewhere in that district." He rubbed a hand across his face, the exhaustion of the night finally showing through his usually composed exterior. "If Victor finds it first, whatever it is, it changes everything about how this ends." "What could be worth all of this?" I asked quietly. "Worth attacking your home, worth threatening someone like me over a single overheard word?" "I do not know yet," he admitted, and I could tell the admission cost him something, that a man like Damien Vale was not accustomed to saying those words aloud. "But I intend to find out before Victor does, because whatever it is clearly powerful enough to be worth killing for, even after 11 years of silence." I reached across the small table, an instinct I did not fully examine before acting on it, and rested my hand over his. He looked up, surprise flickering briefly across his face, before softening into something gentler. "You have not slept," I said. "Neither of us have. Whatever happens with Victor and that warehouse, it will still be there in a few hours. You cannot fight a war exhausted." "I have gone longer without sleep," he said, though the ghost of a smile touched his mouth at my concern. "That is not the same as saying you should," I said, and to my surprise, he let out a low, tired laugh, the first real sound of amusement I had heard from him since the ballroom 2 nights before. "You are very stubborn for someone who was terrified of me less than 48 hours ago," he said. "I am still terrified of you," I admitted, just apparently not terrified enough to stop telling you what to do. That earned another quiet laugh, and something in the small, ordinary warmth of the moment, sitting across a kitchen table in a hidden safe house, while danger circled somewhere outside, felt more real and more honest than anything that had happened at the extravagant party where all of this began. He turned his hand beneath mine, lacing our fingers together, and for a long moment neither of us spoke, simply sitting with the quiet understanding that whatever came next, We would face it together now, whether either of us had planned for that or not. Morning arrived through thin curtains, pale light spilling across the small kitchen table, where I had eventually fallen asleep, with my head resting on my folded arms. Someone, Damien I assumed, had draped a blanket over my shoulders sometime in the night, and when I lifted my head, I found him standing near the window, already dressed, already on the phone, his voice low and urgent, in a way that told me the situation had shifted again while I slept. "They found it," he said, ending the call and turning to face me, his expression a complicated mixture of relief and grim determination. "Grace's people intercepted Victor's men at the warehouse just before dawn. They were searching for a ledger, one Edmund Calloway kept hidden before he died, listing every payment, every favor, every betrayal that happened in this city for the 15 years he controlled the docks." "A ledger," I repeated, sitting up straighter, pushing the blanket aside. "That is what all of this has been about. A book." "Not just any book," Damien said, moving to sit across from me. "That ledger names names, Claire. It would expose half the powerful families in this city, mine included, for crimes committed over more than a decade. Whoever controls it, controls every person named inside it, forever. And Victor wanted it for himself. Victor wanted to use it against me," Damien said. "Force me out, take control of everything I have built, and hold that ledger over anyone who dared to resist him afterward. It would have made him untouchable." "Would have," I said, catching the past tense in his voice. "What happened?" A faint, satisfied edge crept into his expression, the first true confidence I had seen from him since Victor first walked into that ballroom. "Grace's people got there first," he said. "The ledger is secure, and 2 of Victor's men are currently very interested in explaining exactly who ordered them to retrieve it, in exchange for their own continued good health." Relief washed through me, quickly followed by a fresh wave of questions. "Then this is over," I said. "Victor cannot use the ledger against you if he does not have it." "It is not entirely over," Damien said carefully, "but it is close. Victor built his entire plan around controlling that book. Without it, he has nothing but empty threats and a failed attack on my house that half the city will hear about by tonight. His own people will start questioning his judgment. In this business, that kind of doubt spreads quickly, and it spreads fatally." We spent the next several hours moving through a blur of phone calls and hurried arrangements. Damien coordinating with Peter and Grace while I sat nearby, finally allowed to hear pieces of a conversation that had been kept from me for days. I learned that the ledger had been hidden inside a false wall in Calloway's old office, untouched for over a decade, until someone, likely one of Victor's own men who had once worked for Calloway before his death, remembered its existence and decided to sell that knowledge to the highest bidder. By late afternoon, word arrived that Victor had retreated to his estate outside the city, his usual confidence apparently shaken by the failure of his plan and the sudden, uncomfortable silence from several allies who had quietly distanced themselves the moment news of his failed attack began circulating. "He is not finished," Damien said, standing near the window of the safe house as the sun began its slow descent toward evening. "Men like Victor do not simply accept defeat and disappear, but he no longer has the leverage he needed, and without that ledger, any move he makes now will be desperate rather than calculated. Desperate men make mistakes." "So what happens to him?" I asked. "That depends on how desperate he decides to become," Damien said, his tone leaving little doubt about what he meant. "But that is no longer something you need to worry about. Your part in this is finished, Claire. The reason you became a target no longer exists." I sat with that for a long moment, surprised by the strange, hollow feeling that settled in my chest at his words. I should have felt relief, pure and uncomplicated, at the news that the danger surrounding me had finally lifted. Instead, I found myself thinking of the quiet moment in the wine cellar, his arms around me, the warmth of his hand over mine at this very table only hours before, and wondering what exactly finished meant for whatever had grown between us in the middle of all that danger. "Finished," I repeated quietly. "Does that mean I go back to my apartment tonight, back to serving drinks at parties I am no longer allowed to attend as anything other than staff?" Something flickered across his face, quick and unreadable, before he crossed the small room and knelt in front of my chair, bringing himself level with me in a way that felt entirely different from every interaction we had shared since the party 2 nights before. "Is that what you want?" he asked quietly. "To go back to exactly how things were before any of this happened." I searched his face, searching for the calculated, controlled man from the ballroom, and finding instead someone far more uncertain than I had ever expected Damien Vale to allow himself to appear. "I do not think I can go back to exactly how things were," I admitted. "Even if I wanted to, too much has happened. Too much has changed." "Has it changed for the worse?" he asked. "Or for something else?" "I do not know yet," I said honestly. 2 days ago I was terrified of you. Now I am terrified of a great many other things. But somehow, strangely, not of you anymore. I do not entirely understand how that happened." A faint smile touched his mouth, and he reached up to brush a loose strand of hair back from my face, his touch gentle in a way that contradicted everything I had believed about him before this began. "Perhaps," he said, "it happened the same way it happened for me. Slowly, and then all at once, somewhere between a wine cellar and a kitchen table." My breath caught at the honesty in his voice, and for a moment neither of us spoke, the space between us charged with something that had been building since the very first moment he pulled me onto his lap in front of an entire room of watching strangers. "There is going to be another party," he said eventually, breaking the silence. "In 3 nights, to reassure everyone who witnessed Victor's failure that nothing has weakened, that everything remains exactly as strong as it was before." "And you want me there," I said, understanding immediately what he was asking, without him needing to say it directly. "Not as staff," he said, "not this time. If you agree to come, you would be there as my guest, as someone I have chosen, publicly and without any strategic calculation behind it. Everyone in that room would understand exactly what that means, and there would be no version of events where anyone mistakes it for anything less than what it actually is." I thought of the first party, the terror of being pulled onto his lap without warning, the humiliation of every eye in the room landing on me at once. And then I thought of everything since, the honesty in the study, the fierce relief in the cellar, the quiet warmth of his hand over mine at this very table. "If I say yes," I said slowly, "it changes everything, not just for 1 night, for however long this lasts." "Yes," he agreed, "it does. And if I say no, then I will respect that," he said, though something in his voice suggested the answer would cost him more than he was willing to admit aloud. "You have already given more to this than anyone should reasonably have to give. If you want to return to your old life, free of all of this, I will make certain nobody ever bothers you again. That much, I can absolutely promise you." I studied him for a long moment, this man who had turned my ordinary, invisible life upside down in the span of a single evening, who had frightened me, and protected me, and, somewhere in the chaos, become someone I could not imagine, simply walking away from, without carrying the weight of that choice for the rest of my life. 3 nights, I said finally. "You said the party is in 3 nights." "Yes." "Then I suppose you have 3 nights to convince me it is worth saying yes to." The smile that spread across his face was unlike anything I had seen from him before, unguarded and genuine, entirely free of the careful calculation that governed every other part of his life. "I intend to use every hour of those 3 nights well," he said. True to his word, the days that followed felt like nothing I had ever experienced. He took me to quiet places, far from the reach of his usual world, small restaurants, where nobody recognized his face, long walks through parts of the city I had lived in my entire life, but had never truly seen. He told me pieces of his past I suspected he had shared with almost no one else, the weight of responsibility that had fallen onto his shoulders far too young, the loneliness that came with power nobody had ever warned him about. I found myself trusting him in ways I could not have imagined possible only days before, the fear that had once defined every interaction between us, slowly transforming into something steadier, something that felt, against every reasonable expectation, like the beginning of an actual future. On the second evening, we walked along the river as the sun set behind the old bridges, and I finally asked him the question that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind since the safe house. "What happened to the ledger?" I asked. "The one everyone was fighting over. Where is it now?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the water move slowly beneath us before answering. "It is somewhere safe," he said. "Somewhere even Grace does not know the exact location of." I considered destroying it, but a book like that is also a kind of protection. As long as it exists, and as long as everyone believes I control it, very few people will be foolish enough to move against me the way Victor did. "Does that not worry you?" I asked. "Carrying something so dangerous." "Everything about my life is dangerous," he said simply. "The ledger is no different from anything else I already carry. The difference is that this particular weight, at least, can be locked away and largely forgotten, unlike most of what came before it." I thought about that for a while as we continued walking, the city lights beginning to flicker on around us one by one. "Can I ask you something else?" I said. "Something that has nothing to do with Victor or Calloway or any of it." "You can ask me anything," he said, and I believed him. "Why me?" I said. "Out of everyone in that ballroom the first night, out of every person who might have overheard that name eventually, why did it matter so much to you that it was specifically me? You could have simply had me quietly removed from the city, paid me to disappear, handled the entire problem without ever pulling me onto your lap in front of 200 strangers." He stopped walking, turning to face me fully, and for a long moment, he seemed to be searching for the right way to answer honestly, rather than strategically. A habit I was beginning to recognize as something rare and precious in a man who had spent his entire adult life choosing his words with careful calculation. "The truth," he said finally, "is that the moment I saw you standing frozen in that doorway 3 weeks ago, tray shaking in your hands, more afraid of interrupting a private conversation than of anything else in the room, something about you stayed with me longer than it should have. When Victor's name reached me, when I realized you were the witness everyone would eventually come looking for, some part of me was almost relieved to have a reason to see you again." "That is a very complicated way of saying you were curious about me," I said, a small smile tugging at my mouth despite the weight of the conversation. "Perhaps it is," he admitted, a rare, unguarded laugh escaping him. "I am not accustomed to explaining myself, Claire. Give me time, and I imagine I will become better at saying simple things simply. We continued along the river in comfortable silence after that, and later, over a quiet dinner in a small restaurant tucked away from the busier streets, he told me more about his early years, about a father who had built the foundation of everything Damien now controlled, and had died believing power was the only inheritance worth leaving behind. I listened, understanding a little more with each story, why the man who had frightened me so completely on that first night carried himself the way he did, why softness had become such a rare and guarded thing in his life, long before I ever wandered into it. By the time the third day arrived, something had settled between us that felt less like the aftermath of danger, and more like the quiet, steady beginning of something neither of us had expected to find. When Peter arrived that afternoon, with the dress Damien's staff had selected for the evening, I understood, without needing to be told, that whatever answer I gave that night would be remembered by everyone in that ballroom for a very long time. On the third night, I stood once again in the same grand ballroom where everything had begun, but this time, I did not carry a tray of empty glasses toward the kitchen. I wore a deep blue gown Damien's staff had helped me select, my hair styled in a way I barely recognized in the mirror, and when he crossed the room toward me, every eye in the space turning to watch just as they had 2 nights before, there was no fear in my chest this time, only a quiet, steady certainty. He stopped in front of me and offered his hand, not pulling, not commanding, simply asking, and I understood immediately the significance of that small difference from the first night we had stood in this very room. "Everyone is watching again," I said softly, echoing my own words from 2 nights before. "Yes," he agreed, "but this time, you already know exactly why." I took his hand, and together we walked toward the center of the room, past the same senators and dangerous men in dark suits, past Peter, standing watchful near the door, and Grace observing with a small, knowing smile from beside the fireplace. When we reached the same velvet armchair where this entire story had begun, he settled into it, and, this time, I lowered myself onto his lap of my own choosing, my arms settling naturally around his neck, as the string quartet continued playing somewhere near the tall windows, and the room, watching, understood exactly what they were witnessing. Not a claim made in strategy or fear. A choice, made freely, by a woman who had walked into danger without ever meaning to, and walked out on the other side having found something she had never expected to find at all.